In the past couple of videos, we've seen plenty of details about bones and joints themselves, how they operate, what they do, and how to work with them. In this video, I want to take a look at how we actually create them to begin with, because of course we haven't touched upon that. First of all, as has already been mentioned, bones and joints can't just exist by themselves in the scene. They have to be a child of something, of an object or a mesh or whatnot. So the first thing to do before creating any bones is to have an object. In this case, I've just got a simple null. Then, for adding bones, we can see in the bones section here of rigging, we have the add drop down, and this gives us various options for adding different bones. We can add a bone like this, which lets us create a name for it. We can add child bones to things, which we can also do by just hitting the equals key thus. We can add joints by choosing to add joints in this manner, and we can then go on to, of course, add child joints. So again, much the same as adding bones and adding child bones. You'll also notice we have these options for draw bones and draw joints, as well as child versions. Notice that when we use draw bones, the bone, of course, there draws as a child of the null, and we can drag out to decide how big we're wanting our bones to be. But notice, of course, these are singular bones under the null. They are not parented to one another. To draw out a hierarchy of bones, we would use, instead of the draw bones tool, the draw child bones tool, in which case we can start drawing a hierarchy, just like this. The same, of course, goes for using joints. Doing a draw joints will allow us to draw out singular joint pairs, because of course these draw to give us a deformer portion. You'll notice that what you get is a bunch of little two joint hierarchies when doing this. What you can also do though, of course, is to draw child joints after drawing the first joint, and just keep drawing them out in this manner like this. One of the important things to notice when using draw joints and draw child joints is that, like Z bones, they will be oriented to one another. You'll notice that if we click this whole hierarchy here and we alter them to become Z-axis bones, their rest lengths are off because of course they were never set since we were using the draw joints tool, but you can see that parent points to child, they are all aligned properly. This is important to note, of course, because as we've seen with joints, they don't have to be aligned for their deformer portions to exist. You can have them positioned differently in this fashion, and when we are positioning joints around like this, what we do not have is Lightwave aligning them for us. Moving this joint, as we will recall, is not rotating the parent, such that if we actually look at which way these guys are oriented, either by just looking at their rotation handles, or of course we can throw them over to Z-axis, again we see that their orientations hierarchically relative to one another are a mess. This of course is one reason to use the good old RH orient hierarchy script, which will create hierarchical orientation for you if you have moved and positioned things in some manner such as this. Of course it's good for joints, and it is pretty similar to the orient joints tool that you find in Maya, which is what it was created to be analogous to, but it will also work of course for Z bones or any kind of hierarchy, nulls or whatever you like. The other method that we have available to us for creating bones is modeler, where we can draw skelegons. Skelegons, as the name suggests, aren't actually bones, they are polygons that stand in for bones. To create skelegons, you simply just click and drag away, and this will create a little hierarchy of bones like this in modeler for us. When this object is then brought into layout, these can be converted. There are two important things to note. First of all, when you create the first skeleton, you must click, hold, and then drag to draw it out. For subsequent skeletons, you can just go click, 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 and draw them in this fashion. However, if you do that on the first skeleton, you will not get one skeleton, you will get a skeleton of 0 length right at the beginning. The first one must always be drug out. But since you can click and drag out all of the child ones, it might be just as well if you do use this method to get into the habit of always clicking and dragging to avoid confusion. The other thing to take note of with skeletons are these little lollipops that we see popping out from them. What these lollipops denote is which way the pitch orientation of the skeleton is. Obviously in layout we have tools for managing the rotations and the base rotations and orientations of things, and we'll see those shortly. And you could of course just draw your skeletons however you like in Modeler, bring them into layout, convert them, and then do all of the orientating of them. But you can do it here in Modeler itself simply by grabbing these little lollipops and nudging them about. I'll show you this. If I grab this guy here and I bring it down nice and flat like this, we can now see that whilst all of the other lollies are pointing up, that one is pointing across. It's on the flat. This means that when this is turned into a bone in layout, the pitch axis will be around here for it, whereas for these that are pointing up, the pitch axis would be running around here. Many times when drawing skeletons, you'll get instances like we have on some of these bones here, where the lollies are just at the point of pivot rotation. Which way is this actually pointing? It's hard to say. Because I drew them in top view, I do know that they are actually pointing up. But to help yourself avoid confusion, it's usually handy to alter them. The way to do this is to drop your Create Skelegons tool, select the first or all of your skelegons, and then hit the Edit Skelegons button, and you'll notice that boom, the lollies have popped up into place. We wouldn't have been able to grab them before, because if you click in this solid circle, that basically just moves the point or joint of the skeleton, and it's impossible to grab the little lolly handle. Therefore, dropping the tool, selecting and going into Edit Skellies mode gives us the ability to then grab these as they pop up after that point. Once you've drawn your skellies into your object, of course you need to save it, and it can then be sent over to layout. Once you're in layout, you just get this little line drawing, because your skelegons are essentially 2-point polygons. They can then be converted by using the Convert Skelegons into Bones. If we take a peek at them and we look at their orientations, you'll notice that to start with, their pitch axes all seem to be oriented round more or less the same way. This one here isn't, it's on its side, but if you recall in Modeler, this is the one whose pitch axis we altered. Seems a bit strange. The reason is that it has set the rotation of these skelegons, or the rotation of these bones, relative of course to their parents. If you want to snap those in, then you would record their pivot points. So if I select all of these guys and just do a record pivot on them, what we then see is actually now the pivot rotations are as we asked them to be in Modeler. That one's slightly on edge, which is how I dragged it around. These guys are straight up. This one is on its side, which is how we had it, and then the next one is of course straight up again. As I said, skellies, when we brought them into layout, just appeared as a set of lines, a set of 2-point polygons. And what you'll notice you can also do in Modeler, if I add points like this, and then what I do is select 2 points at a time and hit the P to make polygon, creating of course a 2-point polygon, I can then turn these into skelegons by using the Convert Skelegons tool here. This can then again have these skelegons converted into bones in layout. You'll also notice of course the hierarchy that is created here. These bones are already parented to one another in a hierarchy, as was the previous one if you were keeping your eye out for such things. This comes from Modeler, basically on how these things are stuck together. If I grab this skeleton here and move it around, you can see that the other skelly is stuck to it. That's because they share a common point here. They are welded together. The vertices are effectively welded to one another. You can undo that by cutting and pasting a skeleton in, so as you wind up with this, and of course alter that by welding them back together, and this sets the hierarchy up for you in Modeler as it will come into layout. You've also got the skeleton tree here which is available, and like this you can set parenting in much the same way that you do in the scene editor in layout. You can also set up initial naming here if you want by selecting any skeleton and choosing the name skeleton options. Generally, most bone creation and operation is most easily done in layout. But sometimes if you're wanting to lay down an initial skeleton into something, it can be advantageous to do so in Modeler. Mainly because of course you can lay them out using the modelling tools. Since you are just manipulating points, you can drag them around, use set value tools to get exact placements, weld them off to things, or indeed grab the points of a mesh and clone them, holding them in place from which to create skeletons that need to be placed exactly. So there we go. Those are our bone creation methods that we get in Lightwave. Pretty simple to get along with, and once you've used them a couple of times, you'll find it easy as pie.